Get going here. Recording has started. It's good to see some new faces and faces we haven't seen for a bit. So welcome to the Livingston County ROSC Council meeting held on the first Thursday of each month. We're glad you're all here. Like I mentioned, if you weren't on, we are recording all of our meetings going forward, and we're thankful that everyone made it. And you know, the great thing about February 1st, when you get up and there's this big shiny orb in the sky, it's a great way. I haven't seen it for like 2 weeks. It's a great way to start your day. So very thankful that that has taken place. This morning, it doesn't look like it's that great out there now, but you know what? It's a blessing to see the sun from time to time. So do we have anyone on that is a first timer? Yes, we do. We've got a couple I see. So this is a time we're gonna reserve a little bit of time for name recognition and your organization and your affiliation with that. So if you're a first-time attendee to the Livingston County ROSC, and I see a couple Melissas, and that is great that they're both here today. So whichever Melissa would like to go first, you're welcome to join in. Let us know who you are and where you're from.
Well, thank you for having me today. I'm Melissa Engel, and I am the Community Engagement Director with Safe Journeys, and we're the Domestic and Sexual Violence Agency serving Livingston and LaSalle counties.
Thank you for joining. And Melissa from LifeSil, I believe, are you? Yes, you're on.
Yes, it is me from LifeSil. I am on. I don't think I have my camera on though.
Oh, there you are.
I'm still kind of new to this, so still learning, but yes, from LifeSil. I'm going to try to stay in the meeting as long as possible, but if I disappear, just know I had something else I had to do with training, so.
Well, thank you both for being here, and we understand if you've got to hop off to take care of business. We've all been in that position, and we thank you for attending, and we look forward to you attending next month. Melissa from LifeSil did join us in our resource subcommittee meeting last week, and it was great to have her and Vicki in attendance at that. So we're going to go on to something a little bit different. Don't know if you've ever heard of this gentleman. His name is William White. William White was born in Illinois, I believe around Decatur. His first job was with the Illinois Department of Mental Health in 1967. And he came in 1975, he pursued his master's in addiction studies at Goddard. And he came to Chestnut Health in I got out of order. He came to Chestnut in 1970, and he worked at Chestnut Health Systems in the community treatment centers, and became the clinical director. After his master's, he returned to Chestnut. He's a known author, an advocate of recovery systems, a humanitarian, and a historian. So we're going to watch a couple short videos that Mr. White attended this conference in 2012. And it describes some history about what we all do. So if we want to go ahead and get started with that, we'll listen to Mr. White briefly.
To set the stage for this discussion, I first want to acknowledge just how far back recovery goes historically in what we know as the United States. Organized recovery, as I've researched it, dates in the United States to the 1730s, and a series of Delaware prophets who, behind their own recovery from alcoholism, organized abstinence-based cultural and religious revitalization movements, the largest of which will later be the Handsome Lake movement that will evolve into the Longhouse religion, which continues to exist today. The central tenet of the Handsome Lake movement was a rejection of alcohol and a rejection of all other European folkways, and a return to native traditions and native folkways. We see behind the Handsome Lake movement a long series of prophet movements. The Shawnee prophet and the Kickapoo prophet that's going to then in the late 1800s emerge in the form of the Indian Shaker Church and the Native American Church. And we could actually continue this history forward within Native communities through the 20th century with the rise of culturally indigenous sobriety movements, including the beginning Indianization of Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1950s, the emergence of the concept of the Red Road in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and the emergence of the contemporary Wellbriety movement that has rapidly spread through Native communities in the United States. If we look at Euro-American communities, organized recovery really dates to the 1830s, as people today we would know as alcohol dependent began to seek out early temperance societies and use those societies as a framework. I've actually got the first collection of recovery case studies in the United States in a pamphlet from 1833 by Sigourney and Smith that virtually catalogs these sort of reform case studies in the pre-Washingtonian years in the United States. In April of 1840, 6 men that were part of a drinkers club in Baltimore, Maryland, were sitting around one evening, as they did every evening, drinking and debating. And the debate this evening was on the proposition that all temperance lectures were hypocrites. And they decided that since there was a lecture on temperance that very evening, they would send out a subcommittee to research this. Can you imagine this happening? I think we probably could. The subcommittee goes, here's the lecture, comes back, a lively discussion ensues, and the upshot of that is a decision that they should start their own temperance society, but only for hard cases. Now, the term alcoholism hasn't yet been coined, but hard cases was the contemporary term for what we would later call alcoholism. That movement grew from these 6 men to more than 400,000 people within 48 months, and then almost disintegrated overnight. And the alcoholics in that movement went underground and began to organize recovery-focused fraternal temperance societies, closed societies organized by and for recovering alcoholics that function very well as sobriety-based frameworks for recovery, became very closed groups and quite elitist in their orientations. I actually have documents describing some of these groups who only wanted drunkards of good repute to be part of their societies. There may actually be a few of those groups still around. I will leave you to make that call. By the time we get to the 1870s, we have a new recovery framework emerges, which is the Ribbon Reform Clubs that's going to begin in the Northeast and rapidly spread south and begin to spread then into the Midwest. We're going to get other groups like the Dashaways in San Francisco. One of my favorite groups is the Drunkards Club in New York City. The point that I want to make here is we have a very large number of pre-AA alcoholic mutual aid societies. We also had societies emerge within the context of a growing network of addiction treatment programs in the 19th century. The first of these is the Alapod Club, organized within the New York State Inebriate Asylum, and we would have the Godwin Association and others. The largest of these is the Keeley Leagues, which were organized in the early 1890s and went on to have more than 30,000 members associated with the growing network of Keeley Institutes across the United States. This is an image of Keeley League number 1 in Dwight, Illinois, sitting over the banner, which was part of the advocacy message that came out. We're going to talk later about a new recovery advocacy movement. We had advocacy as a major theme among the Keeley Leagues. In 1895, they're going to march on the Capitol of the state of Pennsylvania, lobbying for a Keeley law that would provide state funds to pay for indigents to receive the Keeley cure who could not personally afford it. We also, as we began to see the growth of treatment in the United States, we actually have a very elaborate network of treatment in the 19th century. We have the early inebriate homes that's going to begin in this city in 1857 with the opening of a home for the fallen. I always think of I've fallen and I can't get up every time I say that. That home is going to open and close fairly quickly, but reopen under the banner of the Boston Washingtonian Home. And the Washingtonian Home in Boston and Chicago will be two of the premier inebriate homes in the United States, with both of those continuing well into the modern era. We're also going to have much more medically directed inebriate asylums. And this is going to begin with the opening of the New York State Inebriate Asylum in 1864. They're going to be, again, much more medically oriented than recovery focused. They're going to involve very physical methods of treatment, prolonged treatment, often legally mandated commitments for treatment, anywhere from 1 to 2 years. We're also going to have private for-profit addiction cure institutes that each are going to compete with one another for who can cure addiction the fastest with the least amount of hypodermic injections and vomiting. I will describe later a few of these. We're also going to have boxed and bottled home cures, the same proprietary drug industry that's going to addict large numbers of American citizens with opium and morphine and cocaine and alcohol-laced patent medicines, is then going to begin to offer cures for the alcohol, tobacco, and drug habits, nearly all of which will be loaded with alcohol, opium, morphine, cocaine, chloral hydrate, etc. We're going to see urban missions and rural inebriate colonies, which is in many ways the beginning of specialty sector faith-based recovery in the United States. And this is really going to begin with Jerry McCauley's work and the urban mission movement in New York City and the arrival of the Salvation Army and their special ministry to late-stage urban alcoholics in the 1880s. We're going to see during this time also specialized treatment for women. We tend to think of that as a relatively modern development, but we had specialized institutions exclusively for the treatment of addicted women. The shame related to this was so great, however, that many of the women entering treatment did so under assumed names, and even their physicians did not know their true identities. We're going to have a growing professionalization of this network of treatment with the founding in 1870 of the American Association for the Study and Cure of Inebriety, the first scientific journal in addiction. The Journal of Inebriety is going to begin publication in 1875. And this entire movement is going to reach its heydays in the 1880s and 1890s. This is the image, this is the building, the New York State Inebriate Asylum. It's rather stunning to me when I think of the broken down Victorian homes that my first treatment programs existed in, to look back in 1864 and realize that facilities like this once existed. This is a typical cure for the private addiction cure institutes. You'll see the liquor habit is cured in 3 days, but it takes 10 to 14 days to cure morphine addicts. These are typical, some of the typical kind of miracle cures for alcoholism and drug dependence. This is one of my favorites. It's called 32 glass vials. You take a vial a day for 32 days. You're promised complete comfort in your detoxification and that the craving for alcohol will be forever destroyed. My only question to you was, would you trust a cure coming from a place called Pandora Laboratories? It was very common in these days to see very aggressive advertising by the pharmaceutical industry. Morphine, painless home cure, painless and permanent, providing some new miracle ingredient. Nearly all of these contain morphine and most of them contain morphine at higher numbers of grains than most people were addicted. So in the name of treating addiction, people actually developed even more intractable addictions. And my point with this is the theme of harm in the name of help has a very, very long tradition in the history of addiction treatment. This widely spreading movement virtually collapsed in the late days of the 19th century and the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And there were many things that contributed to this collapse. Ideological splits in the field, sound familiar? A lack of science-grounded treatments. At the time, a spotlight was shown on this field, and there was a demand for scientific evidence behind claims of things like 100% cures. There simply was no scientific evidence to provide. The field had leaders who in the 1860s and 70s birthed this field and nurtured it into maturation as they matured in their careers, only to then have, as the field faced incredible crises, the aging leaders had disengaged or lost energy and had not dealt with the issue of leadership succession and leadership development within the field. So in some ways, you could say this field died of old age, a phenomenon that actually could be replicated in the next decade if we're not extremely careful. There were also economic depressions that blindsided this field and forced policymakers and philanthropists to make very tough decisions around the allocation of these resources. Does any of this sound familiar to anyone? But more than anything else, that collapse of early treatment came from this culture literally losing faith in the prospects of long-term recovery. Behind 100 claims of these 95 and 100% cures, how long do you think it took before everyone in the culture knew someone for whom treatment had not worked? And with that growing pessimism came a radically different decision in this culture. What we said as a culture was, let's let the existing alcoholics and addicts die off, and the sooner the better. And we're going to prevent the creation of a new generation by legally prohibiting the sale of alcohol and aggressively and legally controlling the distribution of opium, morphine, cocaine, chloral hydrate, and the newly arriving barbiturates.
Kind of an interesting pattern, isn't it? We're going to see another brief video from Dr. White in just a moment here. I'm kind of a history buff, and I do have my copy right here of Slaying the Dragon, the history of addiction treatment and recovery in America. And some of what we see there is kind of astounding as we know recovery today. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at this second video.
With that collapse, we entered a very shameful period of regression within the field. Alcoholics and addicts were transferred to rural penal colonies and work farms that became attachments to county jails. They were transferred to the back wards of what were already aging state psychiatric asylums. And a very important note with that was the concept that addiction was a disorder in and of itself was destroyed, and with that came this belief that if addiction was simply a symptom of underlying psychopathology, then what that meant was that the treatment of addiction in insane asylums in this country would simply apply indiscriminately whatever was in vogue in psychiatry over the coming decades. And that would include periods of mandatory sterilization of alcoholics and addicts, particularly female addicts and alcoholics. It would include indiscriminate application of electro and chemoconvulsive therapies. It would include psychosurgery, particularly prefrontal lobotomies, as a treatment for addiction. It would include drug insults of every variety and extremely prolonged periods of sequestration. We also saw in the cities the emergence of foul wards and foul cells in the urban hospitals to deal with the issue of the chronic public inebriate, including the Boston City Hospital. We also began to see, again, these invasive treatments move from the specialty sector of psychiatry into the larger medical communities. These are images. I want to give you a little bit of a feel for what it was like for me to enter the field in 1969 and see the very tail end of what the world looked like before there was specialized addiction treatment in the United States. This is the alcoholism ward at Peoria State Hospital, where I was a volunteer in 1987 and 1988. What I can't convey to you is the despair, and what I can't convey to you is the smell of this place. Between the urine and feces and formaldehyde, you could smell this place within about 150 yards of approaching the building. These are the shackles that were moved by a very progressive psychiatrist, George Zeller, from the detoxification cells within Peoria State Hospital. This is an addict at Lexington in the 1930s receiving electroconvulsive therapy as an experiment to see if ECT would speed up the withdrawal process. This takes us to the rebirth, the beginnings that are going to rekindle the years that are going to lead to the rise of modern addiction treatment and recovery support as we know it. This is going to begin with the emergence of what many of us as historians have christened the modern alcoholism movement, including the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1935. It's going to include the development of the Yale School of Alcohol Studies. The Research Council on Problems of Alcohol are going to come together and basically promote a new scientific understanding of alcoholism. And the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is going to begin to rebirth public perception of hope for long-term recovery from alcoholism. For that movement to eventually rebirth a treatment system required replicable treatment models. And those models are going to come in the 1940s through the outpatient Yale clinics that are going to incorporate the use of lay therapists. These are recovering alcoholics, trained to be therapists and supervised by other therapists who will work within these outpatient clinics. We're going to see the extension of AA into AA wards in local hospitals in communities like Akron and New York and Philadelphia and an AA ward in the Washingtonian Hospital here in Boston. We're going to begin to see the rise of a Minnesota model at Hazleton and Pioneer House and Wilmer State Hospital in the state of Minnesota in the late 1940s and the 1950s. And we're going to see that model taken to Chicago in an institution called Lutheran General Hospital that's going to set the stage for the mass replication of 28-day rehab programs throughout the United States in the 1980s. We also, on the drug addiction side, particularly narcotic addiction side, we're going to see three things. One is the emergence of therapeutic communities, beginning with Synanon in 1958, and the rapid growth of second-generation therapeutic communities. Synanon is itself going to go on and become an extremely closed, incestuous system and eventually implode, but will be enormously important in the sense that Synanon graduates are going to come to New York and start Daytop Village. And Daytop is going to go to Chicago and start Gateway and Phoenix and Reality and on and on and on. And that's going to exert an enormous influence on residential treatment during this time period. We're also going to get two pioneering physicians, Dr. Marie Neiswander, a psychiatrist, Dr. Vincent Dole, an endocrinologist, who are going to develop a metabolic theory of narcotic addiction and begin to pioneer the use of methadone as a maintenance agent in the treatment of chronic opioid addiction. We're also in the 60s going to see rising polydrug abuse, and we're going to see behind that the emergence of everything from things we then called acid rescue and community crisis clinics and street outreach programs, but most importantly, a modality called outpatient drug-free treatment that's going to pull in every imaginable psychological theory of addiction and spin that off into therapeutic interventions, mostly with young polydrug using individuals and their families. The advocacy movement that's going to begin in the 1940s, and I really want to emphasize, we would not exist as a field today if there weren't, for the most part, recovering people and their families who spent the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, most of their adult lives, lobbying to radically change how this country perceived alcoholism and drug dependence. Marty Mann on the left spent almost her entire life basically trying to rewire this country's attitudes, and she did that very successfully and brought that advocacy movement into the early 1970s. And with Harold Hughes on the right, pioneered legislation that will create NIAAA and NIDA and begin this federal, state, local partnership that has really been the foundation of modern addiction treatment for these decades. So in the subsequent years since, which I'm condensing into a couple of sentences, we went from less than 500 programs in the 1960s when I first began to have contact with this field, to more than what is today, a report that I just read this week, we are now at more than 15,000 specialty sector addiction treatment programs. And let me just say euphemistically, this has been an amazing run for us. If somebody would have told me in those stench-filled backwards of Peoria State Hospital, Bill, don't despair, because in your lifetime, you will see prominent people from all walks of life step forward and announce their status of being in recovery from alcoholism and drug dependence. They would have said, don't worry, you're going to see 15,000 addiction treatment programs in the United States before you die. You're going to see early intervention programs in the workplace and in the schools. You're going to see primary prevention programs throughout the country. Bill, you're going to see more than 100,000 people in recovery marching in the streets of the United States as people in recovery, publicly. I would have thought they'd been smoking the funny weed, because that would have been beyond my comprehension. And yet we have lived this incredible miracle of the past decades.
So how was that for a history lesson? Where we were, where we are, and a better idea of where we're going. So does anyone want to mention, or let's do a roundtable about let's have a discussion about what we just saw and what are your takeaways from this. And whoever'd like to go can jump right in. Hopefully someone will want to go.
I was just going to say, I love seeing the involvement of Livingston County. It's for such, I mean, obviously a lot has gone on in our state in general, but for the fact that the Dwight institution was so instrumental in the beginning is just wild to me.
Yeah. Right here, 100 and whatever that was, 30 years ago, the Keeley Cure, the gold standard to recovery, Dwight, Illinois.
I loved watching that, John, and it just gives you perspective. And maybe like sometimes when we lose hope and we think like as a community we're not getting where we want to be with recovery and stigma and all that, it just to take a look back and see, you know, how far we've come. And some of those images of like the state hospitals and stuff, I mean, it seems like that's like so long ago, like centuries ago, but it really wasn't. It wasn't that many years ago that was our you know, opinions and stance on addiction. So it's very eye-opening, giving perspective.
Yes, thanks, Cammie. Jeff?
Yeah, it's good to actually see it in a video. When I first got into this field, you know, almost 2.5 years ago, one of the first things I wrote down was from Mark Sanders and Bob Carty urging me and ROSC councils to read the William White papers. And I did. I didn't just write it down and say, okay, if I get to it. I read it that day and I was completely floored. And I think if it's any indication how awestruck he was or is from the movements we've made in recovery, I think that's an indication of where it's going in the future too. So wonderful videos. Good stuff, John.
Yeah. I remember as a young person, yes, I can remember that long, my parents taking me to my aunt and uncle's house in Peoria and driving near that hospital. And even though my dad at the time was a sober alcoholic, he would point to that and go, you know, if you grew up like me, you could end up there. And until I read this book, Slaying the Dragon, I'd forgotten about that. And my dad was always protective of me in terms of becoming like him. And but that was what he had. And you look at that image and you look at those shackles from 1969, okay? That's in my lifetime. And that is scary, quite honestly. In my recovery, no one shackled me. And I am super thankful for that. Maybe they wanted to from time to time, but I am super thankful for that. Would anyone else like to share?
Well, I don't mind jumping in. I actually had the good fortune of, meeting and knowing Bill White and working with him when I was originally, with Chestnut back in the late 80s and early 90s. So last century, as I like to say.
Yeah.
But, and I know some of the colleagues that worked with him and that also worked with Chestnut and at Carl when, inpatient treatments were, residential programs were being, developed and implemented by, health systems. And so I think maybe I have a slightly different perspective on, I've read his book and seen the videos and the papers and read the papers and whatnot, but what strikes me is that some of it's still the same, only different, meaning we don't put people in real shackles. We shackle them economically and through health insurance limitations and housing insecurity. I mean, these are structural ways of shackling people. And Zeller's Own Center, the state op that was in Peoria that was closed, that none of those dollars were rolled into the community. So in other words, the things that we know then, that we knew then and we know now, some of that we still struggle with, is all of the other supports that are necessary for recovery that are deficits. There are gaps and barriers, to those things. And the other piece is the advent of the commercialization of treatment. When you look at the history of it and see what had happened, in some ways it's what we knew, it's what we had, it was the best we had at that time, perhaps, but that when residential treatments were initially rolled out, everybody automatically got 28 days or 30 days. Everybody got their Hazelden booklet, and they were required to do, the first 3 steps before they were discharged or, whatever. Everybody had a templated treatment plan. I'm grateful to know that our focus now is broader, that we embrace more pathways to treatment, but at the same time, there's still this commercialization, this profitization of treatment, if you will. And that is I mean, that still exists, you know, so, but the history of it is that I guess it's just alarming, you know, that still if we look at people that are different, and I'm going long here, I'm sorry, but looking at people differently, if we consider them different, then we legitimize different treatment. And that is that's exactly what stigma does. And so some of those things, you know, we look back and go, how awful, right? And it is, it's just horrific. And then we, you know, look at somebody who is unhoused, um, and it's still how awful, you know, when they have those same kinds of struggles. So I was at a conference yesterday, and I'll just say, I'll end with this. I heard this guy, Ron Sprong, the ROSC coordinator from Greene County. He and I were on a panel together, and he said this, and I'm like, I told him, I'm like, I'm stealing it, and I'm saying it every chance I get. And it was, you know, we say recovery is possible. And he said, I don't think it's just possible. I think recovery is probable. And I was like, man, that is a powerful thing that we can actually say that recovery, you know, it's not just a roll of the dice. It's not just a possibility. I mean, if we actually do the things that we know are helpful, it's probable. It's absolutely probable. We would never say that to a diabetic. Hey, look, hope you're, you know, it's possible that we'll get your diabetes under control through metformin. We would never say that. We would say it's probable you do these things, you know, we're here to help you. So I think that is the value of ROSCs. And I think that is something that, you know, we can continue to get the message out, you know, about. So I was grateful to be on the panel with him and hear him say that. That was a great way to, you know, reframe the message. So that I'm going to be quiet.
Thank you for sharing, Dave. Good points for sure. Does anyone else have anything for that portion? If not, we'll move on to the next slide, and we will ask the quick, there again around the room, around the table, who do you see or who do you not see at our table? The change model, 12 key community sectors. Who are we missing at the Livingston County ROSC table? Is it parents, business, media, schools, youth serving organizations, law enforcement, civic volunteer, religious fraternal organizations, healthcare professionals, state, local, tribal governments, substance abuse organizations, you know, or youth? Who are we missing at this table? I think some of us know, but let's go around if anyone has anything to say about that, please. Well, I think at this point for me, I think we have someone at the table, maybe not in this specific meeting, but on our ROSC council. I think where we're a little short is business and youth. And in working with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Livingston County, some inroads into the schools, some. I think we'll see a change in that over the next calendar year. Certainly what we're hoping for. And if anyone else has anything in that regard, let us know. Shoot an email, send a text, bring it to a meeting, bring it to a subcommittee meeting. Just let us know where we can all work on that and where we can do a different job, not necessarily a better job, but a different job to bring others to this table. The video showed, and to hinge on what Dave said, you know, the archaic way of treating people with substance use disorder or call it whatever you want. It's been called everything over the last 160 years that those videos depicted. It's about educating for change. It's about what's next. We don't want to necessarily dwell on the old stigma Well, what are we going to change? How are we going to bring that to light to people as we educate? Personally, the word stigma in a lot of situations brings more stigma to the situation. It doesn't always, but it certainly can. So how are we speaking in groups outside of our agencies here at this council? What words are we using? How are we determining the need for individuals? So let's go on to agency updates, and we'll go around and we'll have a little time to talk about what you're doing in your agency, and whether that's events or resources, collaborations, supports, and if you have any questions or concerns. Anyone?
We are currently working on our annual report. So if anyone has any fun stats throughout the last year, or even like comparable ones for the last few years that you'd like us to include, especially in regards to substance use or mental health, please feel free to reach out. Some of the, I know, Safe Journeys or places like that we're already reaching out to, but if anyone would like to chime in or send anything that you thought was interesting of just the past year or so, please feel free to.
Awesome, Taylor. Thank you.
I have a quick update that I'd like to share. Although I support Livingston County ROSC, I also oversee our Center for Community Engagement, also known as our CCE project with Chestnut Health Systems. We recently launched our website, which has been really exciting. There are a wide variety of tools and resources on our websites for communities to utilize as they see fit. In addition to that, all of our previous learning collaboratives that are available on a monthly basis have been recorded and are also posted on the website. So some really great training opportunities to check out there. So I will throw the website in the chat, and if anyone would like to check that out, feel free to do so. And I'm always available to answer any questions that maybe you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. Sheriff Baum has put in the chat that the Livingston County Jail has had a change in their healthcare provider, and our new mental health professional, their new mental health professional is settling in. So thank you for that information. That is great to know that that is moving forward within the jail system. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a few things. I think I missed introduction, so sorry about that. But I'm Abby Behrens, and I work at Brightpoint in Bloomington, and I work specifically with the Butterfly Project. I just wanted to share a few things. Our crisis nursery, which is located in Bloomington. So if you do work with anyone in McLean County, but anyone from Livingston County would qualify as well, is hosting a diaper grab and go / like crisis nursery open house. And that's February 7th. From 3 to 5 p.m. at our Bloomington location on State Street. If you check out like Brightpoint's Facebook page, the Crisis Nursery Facebook page, I can also send John a flyer. We have a new program supervisor, and we're going to be handing out like diapers and wipes, and a bunch of our services. We'll be hosting resource tables. So it's just a great opportunity for families to get supplies if they're in need and learn about other services that we offer. I also wanted to share that February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And so I will be posting on the Butterfly Project Facebook page weekly some different posts with like links to videos and trainings and just information on that. So if you're interested in following us, I can also send John a little like Facebook page thing where you can scan a QR code and get linked to us if you're not following us already. And I think that's pretty much it for now. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Abby, and we will gladly get that posted to our social media. Anyone else? Well, let's talk a little bit about what the ROSC is doing in, oh, here it is, what the ROSC is doing, or the resource subcommittee met last week. So we've got some great events coming up in Livingston County that we would like other agencies to certainly participate in. and it's not just the ROSC, but it's other things that are going on. Livingston County Health Department is hosting a Party in the Park Saturday, April 27th. We will also be participating in hopefully, the ROSC will be participating in the Swinging Bridge Festival, May 4th and 5th. Also in Fairbury on May 4th, the Overdose Awareness Run Walk is going to be held at Marsh Park. I believe this is rough, but I believe it's 10 to 4. I believe the first walk is at 10. I could be wrong about that, but May 4th, Saturday, at Marsh Park in Fairbury. IHR has started taking that over from the agency that previously done it. And it is an amazing opportunity in Livingston County to participate in that walk-run event. Talk about doing some other events that we can partner with your agencies and others in the county, including law enforcement agencies. Hygiene and warming bags. We're setting our second set of 50 bags forward on the 10th or 11th, it looks like, by the time we get all of the material. We will gather at Livingston County Health Department to fill bags and get those distributed on that day. And we've had some changes to the subcommittee in terms of chair and whatnot, and just announced this morning that Caroline McLeese from the Salvation Army will be our new scribe and calendar manager for everything that goes on in the subcommittees and in ROSC as well. So we want to thank Caroline for stepping forward and doing those things. As always with social media, if you have anything, please email that to me. We'll get that posted right away. And I thought there was one other thing, and it escapes me right now what that is. I apologize. Oh, and also if you know anyone who, or if you yourselves would like to join either the Education for Change Subcommittee or the Resource Subcommittee in Livingston County, contact me. We'll get you set up with meeting times and dates, and we can have a one-on-one prior to that if you choose to help you get involved, because the more the merrier. We see from the history and we see where we want to go by our goals and our strategies for the coming years, that there's work ahead of us, and we certainly appreciate everything that everyone has done in the past, and we look forward to building on that. So are there any other community collaborations or areas of need or areas of support? None being shown. We'll go on to the QPR, question, persuade, and refer. If you're interested in a free training for your agency on suicide prevention, get a hold of, just send me an email, drop me a line. We will be happy to have that initial conversation, set up a meeting time for your agency and your employees, the people you serve, however that may look best for you. And we will provide suicide prevention training, and it's question, persuade, and refer. Get folks who are considering dying by suicide the right place, the right help, the right treatment at the right time. Suicides, and to hinge on what Dave said about recovery, suicide prevention is probable. It's not impossible in all situations. So we will be happy to partner with you in that regard as well. And any questions or final thoughts? Quiet group today. Did everyone nap during the video, or, I'm getting hungry. I want to get out of here. So we got just a couple minutes left. We'll give you back some minutes on your clock. Livingston County ROSC team contact, either myself or Carrie, and then all of the social media avenues that we have with Facebook, the ROSC email, working on doing more with Instagram and YouTube and things. So hopefully that will happen. Scan that QR code if you need more QR cards to get us to the jot form or the area where we can learn about everything that ROSC does, all of the agency updates, all of the resources for help, and all of the resources for meetings and such are right there on that QR code. So scan it, use it, pass it around. If you need more cards to pass out, let me know. And our next meeting will be Thursday, March 7th at noon via Zoom. And we are actually talking about before the end of the year doing some hybrid meetings where we can meet in Livingston County somewhere, have some face-to-face meetings, enjoy each other's company, and still do a Zoom at the same time, so we can have some hybrid. Much like Abby does with Butterfly, that works very well. So thank you for that, Abby, to bring that to us on a regular basis also. So with that said, thank you very much for attending today. Let's go out of here with more positive thoughts than what we came in here with. All right. So everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
Hey, Melissa,